Welcome back to Well and Worthy Life podcast. I'm so excited. I've got another great guest for you guys. And I'm going to try and get this name right, but it's Dr. Sheva, like Bathsheba in the Bible, Marcus. So Dr. Marcus, and she is a certified sex therapist. She's the author of Satisfaction Guaranteed: How to Have the Best Sex You've Always Wanted. She has spent her life helping women reclaim pleasure in their bodies and spirit, and her career has been dedicated to bridging the gap between the medical and the psychological in women's sexual health. For nearly 25 years, she served as the clinical director of one of the largest sexual health centers in the U.S. Dr. Marcus earned her master's in public health as well as a PhD in human sexuality at the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. She also holds a master's degree in social work from Columbia University and a Jewish studies from the Jewish Theological Seminary. She's also a certified bariatric counselor. In the past, Dr. Marcus has served as executive director of a not-for-profit institution and corporations, medical practice, and laboratories. She has lectured internationally on women's issues, gives frequent ground rounds to healthcare providers, as well as lecturing to sex therapists around the world. She has been a guest on numerous radio and television shows, including CNBC, CBS News, Huffington Post Live, and NPR, and been profiled in the New York Times Magazine, Time Magazine, and Westchester Magazine, among others. And now on Well and Worthy Life.
Oh my God, I cannot believe you read that whole bio. That was very sweet of you.
Well, I wanted to because I think that, so many times I have people on here and that I probably don't give them the proper introduction, but there's just so many things in there that I was like, well, I don't want to leave that out. Well, I don't want to leave this out. And so anyway, thank you so much, Dr.
And
Marcus,
I promise your listeners it's going to get more interesting from here in. My bio is
I know. I did think about that. I thought, but I love this topic. Well, first of all, I love the title of your book, Satisfaction Guaranteed: How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. I think that I'm right here in Alabama and we're in the Bible Belt. And I was really taught that we don't talk about sex. I mean, it happens, but just don't talk about it. And I don't really know that anybody taught me at a young age that we were supposed to enjoy it. We just really didn't get good conversations. And then somehow we found our way through it, or I found my way through it, maybe good, maybe bad. And then I hit menopause. Like, wait, what's happening? I had really kind of gotten into my sexuality really in my 30s and 40s and felt really good about it. And then my 50s hit and menopause hit. And oh my gosh. So I think this is such a great topic. I think the whole book, it's not just for menopausal women, you guys, it's for all women, but we're going to focus on the menopausal woman because that's who my audience is.
Can I just say before we start that if I didn't know that you said that you were in your 50s, I would fall off my chair because you look so much younger. I just need to say that to you. Okay.
So thank you. You're so sweet. I don't feel like, it's funny because I'm 57 and have a granddaughter and we have so much fun together. So half the time I don't even feel like I'm that old. And now all my friends are turning 60, but anyway, it is kind of funny. I do think though that this sex can keep you young. And I think that's what, to be honest with you, when I hit menopause, and we know menopause is actually just one day, but that perimenopause. And then it was, for me, I think it was more postmenopausal that my arousal and desire went, I mean,
she just dipped her hands down really low. So if you're listening and you're not watching, she's like, they disappeared.
Yeah, exactly. It just went awful. And and it bothered me so bad. And so I have talked about this a lot in my balance groups. I have different women's groups that we talk about all these different subjects that we go through, but I really haven't talked about this a ton on my podcast, but I think we need to be talking about this more because I think so many women feel like they are the only ones. They're alone out there.
I am so glad you're talking about this on this podcast, because can I just tell you how often I'll get a client who's a woman who's either perimenopausal or menopausal, and she's almost afraid to have set up the appointment because she doesn't think I'll be able to help her, because she's so convinced that her sex life is over. Right. Like, and of all of my clients whose problems are easiest to solve, to be honest with you, it's perimenopause and menopause. Like, you just need information to turn things around. And it's almost like a home run. Like for me, it's like, woohoo, like let's get a client and make sure that they're happy after 3 or 4 appointments, because that's usually what happens. So, but I think you pointed to something even more fundamental, which is that most of us sort of start out our sex life and kind of blunder our way through until it's working. And then when everything changes, we feel like it's over, as opposed to saying, no, things are just constantly changing and we need to constantly change with it. But almost every problem that comes up is solvable. So I feel like you described that so like poignantly, like perfectly, like you had things going and you kind of hit your stride in your 30s and your 40s, and then menopause hit like this ton of bricks. And now what the hell do you do?
Right, exactly. So let's go back and talk about that. I will say one of the things that I want to make sure the audience does is take the quiz that you have. And will you tell them where to go to take that?
Well, here's the story.
Okay.
I have a mini, the entire book is built on a quiz.
Right.
Deanna and I were just talking about that. The book is built on a quiz because for lots of different women, different problems sort of poke out in different ways. And so by taking the quiz, it really makes it easier for you to hone in on what the problem is. Like, am I not wanting to have sex because it's painful, or is it painful because I don't really want to, and therefore I'm not having sex? Is my orgasm a problem because I'm also not getting turned on, or am I not getting turned on because I'm not having orgasm? Like, it helps you kind of narrate. So I have a mini quiz that's online, that's for free. And you can just, if you go to my website, drbatsheva.com, you can find it. To take the full quiz and get the actual description of what you need to be looking for, it's in the book, Satisfaction Guaranteed. Right. So you need to kind of buy the book, and in there is the link for the full quiz, but it is online. So you don't have to use that stupid paper and pencil and do your math. Like, I know everybody hates that, right? You can just click away. And you can do it a number of times. Like, if you can do it, and then after a few months, you could do it again, or a year or two later, because things are always changing. And once you have your score, and the score is built on 4 areas that women, that usually problems rear their heads in. And those are problems with pain, problems with desire, I don't want to have sex, problems with arousal, which is different, which is I want to have sex, but I don't get turned on, and problems with orgasm. So you get scores in all those 4 quadrants. And then it's like choose your own adventure. It's like, okay, if your score is really low in this area, try chapters 6, 8, and 12. Or if you're more interested in this area, try chapters 9 and 13. So that's the way the quiz is built. But if you want to just do a mini quiz to kind of see how it works and kind of get some sense, go to my website, Dr. Batsheva, DRBATSHEVA, and just go to the book, and it has the mini quiz right there for you to give it a shot, give it a whirl. And you can let me know how you do, because I'd love to know.
Yeah. So I love that. So I did the quiz, and I felt like my score was pretty good. I think it was 110. So I felt,
okay.
yeah, I was like
what? Yeah. 100 is sort of the threshold that I'm looking for, but yeah.
If I had taken it a few months ago, I would have scored very low. So this is something that I've been really focused on.
What did you change? I'd be so curious. Like, what do you feel like you changed? And also, you want to do 2 things. You want a score that's like over 100, but you also want to know if it's sort of even, because if you end up with like a 35 in one and a 12 in another, not so great. Okay.
So I think it was my hormones were low. And so I've really focused on the hormones, and really, I guess to me, that was probably the biggest thing. That was the biggest change, and just continually working on it, shifting my mindset, trying to get myself in the mood, because my thing was not pain, but it was more that arousal and desire. It was like, I remember at one point thinking I could go the rest of my life and never have sex again. That, to me, when I thought that, I thought, no, I am too young. I want to be having sex way into my 80s and 90s. I know the health benefits of intimacy and sex with my partner. I mean, there are just so many health benefits, plus the oxytocin and all the things that we need. So when I started feeling like that, that was when I was like, no, I want to work on this.
No, and I'm so glad you're saying that, because it has to do with, it gives you so many health benefits for you, your relationship, but it also makes you feel differently about yourself.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
think about yourself when you feel like you're a, actively sexual being, and you don't have to have a partner to be a sexual being, right? Like, you could have solo
Right.
sex, right?
Mhm.
So I want to make sure people listening realize that when you're feeling like you are a sexual being and you still want sex, get turned on by sex, can still have orgasms, like, you feel differently. You walk through the world in a different kind of way than you do if you're somebody who's sort of like cut out that part of your life. Like, I think that
Mhm.
and I'm so curious. So did you go after the estrogen, the testosterone? Tell me a little about the hormones. Can you do that?
So yeah, so I'm on a bioidentical cream. So I worked on I yeah, I've worked with my doctors over and over. So I have it's estrogen and testosterone and DHEA in
Mhm.
my cream, but I also upped just my taking the DHEA. And honestly, I think that helped tremendously. I really think that was the thing that really, because I really have started doing that in the last 6 months.
You're taking the
Um,
DHEA like orally.
yes.
You're
So
taking
I
50. What do you take? Can I ask what you're taking?
no. So should I take 50? I've got this 5 milligrams. So I take 2 in the morning. So that's 10. And then I take 2 more in the afternoon. So that's 20. And then I've got some of it already in my, so I probably am getting close to 50, but I don't know. Is that the recommended doses?
You know what? This is the kind of
50?
thing people have to talk to their doctor about.
Mhm.
But I would say, some people do really well on 25, some people do well on 50, it's very dependent. But I also feel like the testosterone you're on is probably extraordinarily helpful. Those, you just hit it.
Mhm.
Like, you just like took my little speech away about hormones. The three that as a woman you really need to focus on as you hit perimenopause and menopause are estrogen. I can say what each of them do for
Mhm.
you:
Yes.
testosterone and DHEA. And whoever your doctor is, kudos to them, because many, many doctors, I don't know if this is your gynecologist, but many of them
It's my
do not.
functional medicine doctor.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Many, many gynecologists have misinformation about estrogen, testosterone, and DHA, and many of them aren't comfortable using them. So it's really important to find somebody who feels comfortable with those medications.
Right. Because there was a lot of people are scared of hormones. And I've done some podcasts on that, that women's initiative study that was done so wrong and that it's all such a disservice. So we know that, you know, some of us really need hormones, and I really needed hormones. I mean, I
Yeah,
really did.
I think people don't realize. So estrogen, can I spend a minute just like
Yes, I would
running through
love
them?
to. Yeah.
The perimenopausal and menopausal hormones that you probably need. So let's just talk about estrogen first. And that's the one that everybody's scared of because of that study that you said that was just so horribly done. And there is a wonderful book, if anybody is interested in reading more about it, called Estrogen Matters. An excellent review of estrogen, easy to read, kind of fun and helpful. But what estrogen does, and what people I think don't realize, estrogen affects your whole body, right? Like your brains, your skin, your hair, your bones, your whole body. But in particular, your vagina, your vulva and your vagina are extremely hormonally mediated. They're very affected by hormones. That's going to be those are going to be the first places that start to feel it when you don't have enough estrogen. And there's so much miscommunication about this. You can replenish your estrogen in two different ways. You can replenish it just in your vulva and in your vagina, which is local estrogen, or you can replenish it for your whole body, which is systemic estrogen, right? And there's a whole myriad of ways that you can do that. You can do that with creams. You can do that with like little inserts. You can do that with like, what do you call them? The rings that you put in, like birth control rings, but they're not birth control. It's estrogen rings. There's patches that you can use. There's puffers you can use. But I'm a very, very big fan of women who are hitting menopause getting in systemic estrogen to save their whole body, right? Like to go after your bones and your brain, that brain fog that we hate. And like, that sort of like really dryness of all your skin and your hair, that sort of, people's fear of their bones breaking, all of that stuff is really affected by estrogen. If for whatever reason you don't want to use a systemic estrogen, you're nervous about it, your doctor's nervous about it, you have a very serious history of breast cancer, then local estrogen, which is just estrogen that goes into that little vulva and vagina, because you don't realize how thin the tissue there gets. When it doesn't have enough estrogen, it gets like what they call erythemic. It's like tissue paper. It cracks really easily. It bleeds easily. And lubricant isn't going to do it for you. You need to actually like puff up that area. So estrogen is so, so important. And the truth is, I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to shut up and move on to testosterone.
No,
If you can't do estrogen, if you, for whatever reason, you just are not allowed to, you're too panicky about it, there are now lasers that you can use on your vagina instead of estrogen. Even if you're somebody who doesn't want to use the estrogen because it's a pain in the butt to be using it regularly in your vagina, there are now lasers that work.
So what are
really
these
well.
lasers? Because I saw that chapter in your book.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. Actually, they're not really lasers. We just call them lasers. They're like they're because they're not using light waves. They're using radio waves. So the most famous one, but there's a few of them, is the Mona Lisa. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes, I have heard of that.
And this is not cosmetic, okay? So because I am not a huge fan of cosmetic stuff being done on your vulva and vagina. However your vulva and vagina looks, you go, girl. They all look different. I am not a big fan of that. This has nothing to do with cosmetics. The Mona Lisa is basically an implement or a laser unit that they put into your vagina, and you run it for about 10 minutes. That's it. Honestly, it feels like, the best way I can describe it is it feels like thumping in your vagina. And what it's doing, it sounds horrible, but it's really not painful. It is it's destroying the layer of the mucosa that's in the vagina. And by doing that, it basically, the body then regenerates new mucosa. And so you have this plump, firm mucosa in there. And usually it lasts for a year or two. You have to do 2 or 3 treatments, but usually it lasts for a year or two. And then you may have to do these touch-ups on it. So if you're somebody who really doesn't like to use cream on a regular basis, and you just like, let me get in there, your vagina does feel raw for a couple of days afterwards. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's not super painful. And it's like one of these like 1 and done or 3 and done situations.
Yeah.
And when you start feeling that like discomfort in your vagina, it's just, even if it's not painful, like who wants to have intercourse when it's going to feel sandpapery? That doesn't feel good. Who wants that? Right. So people should just know that that's an option.
Yeah, I love that, because I started feeling it felt different then. Yep. And I was like, I've heard about this going on, but why? I'm like,
I'm not different. I'm still 25. Why is my vagina different? Right.
Exactly.
Totally.
Okay. So then tell us about what testosterone does.
So testosterone is a hormone that has so misunderstood, and it's really just been started to be used for women. People think of it as a male hormone, but women have it and need it. And so women have usually about 1/10 of what men start with, but it seems like we really need it. And so it's usually like highest in our late teens and our early 20s. Believe it or not, it gets a boost. All these hormones get boosted when you're in a new relationship. Your brain starts sending out chemicals, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not in your head. It's so funny, Deanna. We have this weird thing. Like when we see 2 17-year-olds on a bus or whatever, and they cannot keep their hands off each other, do we look at each other and say, oh, they must have had a really deep, meaningful conversation?
No, not at all.
Right. Or he must have just sent her flowers. No, we say their hormones are raging. Right.
Right.
And then when we turn 45 or 50 and we're not really interested in sex, nobody says, oh, it must be hormones. They're like, oh, go see a marriage counselor, like talk about it. You need to have more time to get it. Kind of pisses me off, if you want to know the truth. Like, I feel like it's very, very unfair. So testosterone starts to go down generally in your mid-30s. After you have children, it starts to go down and down. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean you cannot eat better and have better testosterone. Light, I will say, light on your skin, certain light will help, but it's small amounts. And the difference that I see with women who have like low desire and problems with arousal once they get on testosterone is really dramatic. And usually it's given as a cream of some sort that you put on your leg. If you go to see a practitioner and they suggest a cream on your vulva, you just didn't do that, right? Where do you put your cream?
No, I put my cream, it's all mixed together, and I put it on my leg, the inside of my thigh.
Your leg. Exactly. So it goes into your bloodstream that way.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I see somebody who's their doctor said to put it in their vulva. I would say to you, like, that is not okay. Like, you should maybe find another doctor. Because the mucosa there is just very thin. It's not a good idea. So testosterone will make you think about it. It takes months sometimes for it to work. It's not like an overnight. It's not like antibiotics, right? But the idea of testosterone is that it's a hormone that's running into your brain that then says to your brain, I'm thinking about sex. I'm thinking I may be dreaming a little bit more about sex. It's easier for you to fantasize. And we should talk about fantasy because I think women need to focus on that. But having testosterone makes it easier to access your sexual being. So I like to think of it as like the base coat paint. Like if you don't have it, it makes it very hard to get your brain into the game. And that's what ultimately will affect your desire. And it will also affect your arousal and your orgasm. So it's a cream. You want a bioidentical one, just like they gave you, but that doesn't mean it can't be from a company, right? Like companies, like there are products out there, they're all for men, of course, at this point, that are bioidentical, and you can just use a small percentage of it, and doctors can give you those as well. So you don't necessarily need something that's being compounded specially for you. So estrogen and testosterone are super duper important.
And what do you think of testosterone shots and the pellets?
Okay, so I am not a fan of the shots because they don't stay steady. First of all, people don't like shots, but everybody's individual again. So I want to be really clear. As long as your doctor says it's safe and good for you and you feel comfortable with it and it's working for you, go for it, girl. Like that's okay. But in general, the shots, because they're giving you a lot at a certain time and then they go down, whether you do it once a week or once every other week, it doesn't keep a steady state. So that's my concern with the shots. And it's a shot and people don't love shots. So that's the two concerns. I am a huge fan of the pellets.
Are you?
And the truth, I'm a huge fan of the pellets. My experience with the pellets is you put a pellet in, they make this little tiny incision in your butt. It's like the size of a Tic Tac. They pop it in and then you're done for 3 months. Now I'm a fan of the pellets because A, it gives you a steady dose. B, you don't have to do anything. It's like the Mona Lisa. Like as somebody who personally hates putting on creams and, I just don't like having to do stuff every day. I love these one and done solutions, right? So I'm a big fan of the pellets. Now, I will tell you that there's some hesitation from the American Gynecological Society about the pellets. And I'm sure that they're maybe right, but I will also say that they had a lot of questions about testosterone cream 20 years ago. Like it just takes a long time for the science to catch up to the reality. But in my experience of those 25 years working at the center, we used pellets and it worked great. It worked more efficiently. It worked quickly. We didn't have to worry about women forgetting their dosages, remembering to do it. So I personally am a big fan of pellets. Do you have any thoughts on them?
So I have a friend who does them and loves them. And I've known a lot of people who love them, but I have a story to share. One of my clients, she got it. And I've heard this happening before, and I didn't understand that because I don't know. I'm not a scientific person. I'm not a doctor. I don't know that part of it. So it just seemed to me that if you put it in, it would be stronger at first and then it would wear down by the 3rd month. But I don't know, maybe it did that. But she said that the dosage they gave her was so intense that all she did was she felt like a teenage boy. She just thought about sex and she was calling her husband home every 15 minutes. Like, you have to come home. You have to get home.
No, so can I just tell you, so that has to do with the dosage, and you may want to start with the cream before you, but I had almost an exactly the same story with a client who came in who had gone to another doctor who gave her way too high dosage, and she was putting it on her vulva. So it was absorbing really quickly and really deeply. And when we tested her blood levels, they were like literally 10 times what they should have been. And so she was laughing. She said, oh, no wonder I was fantasizing about this little old man neighbor I have. She said, I was like fantasizing about everybody. And so the good news and the bad news, even if the pellet's too high, within 3 months, it's gone, right? Like it goes away. So it's not like you're stuck, number one. Number two, if anything proves to you how significant the testosterone is, that story does, right? Like, right? Like we don't like to believe how much our brains are affected by biology, but they are. And the DHEA that you're talking about is really interesting because it is a precursor hormone, right? DHEA, you can walk into CVS and buy tomorrow. That's what's interesting
Right.
about DHEA.
Mhm.
You could just walk it, but what you need, and it's not controlled at all by the FDA. It's considered completely, over the counter. DHEA is a precursor hormone. It's a hormone that turns into estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone, right? It turns into one of those three. Theoretically, it should turn into whatever your body needs the most of, right?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes,
That's very
exactly.
interesting.
Yes. So like, for example, also if you're a baseball player, if you maybe use DHEA and you'd be disqualified for using like testosterone, but you'd be using thousands of milligrams, not 50 milligrams.
Okay.
It's very gentle. It's very light and it's very gentle. And you're using it as kind of a backup to your other hormones, sort of to
Right.
help push them along. And it can be incredibly helpful as well, especially because it's over the counter. So it's just easier to manage.
Right. Right. Well, I love that. I love that explanation. We know that hormones can help us, but let's talk about okay, so there are these 4 areas that and then when I read these 4 areas, pain, arousal, orgasm, and desire, I think all 4 of these areas can be menopausal women for sure, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
pain because
Absolutely.
they're dry,
But
right?
it's
I
not just
mean,
the dry. Can we
it's
talk about
not
pain for
okay.
1 minute?
Yeah, let's
It's not
do
okay.
that.
Because I
Okay.
want to tell you the story about a client that I had
Mhm.
years ago that like completely for me just changed everything. This had to be 15 or 20 years ago. And I get a call from this woman in New York City where I live and where our center was we had a couple centers, but, and she said, I've been married for 30 years. I always had a good sex life. All of a sudden it's so painful. And I want to know what you're going to do for me before I come in, because I've been to 3 of the top gynecologists in New York City and they just keep throwing estrogen at me. And I said to her, look, I'm really good at what I do, but I have yet hit profit status and I cannot do this over the phone. Like, we need to figure out what's going on. It was like a medical center when she came in. So what became really clear and what people don't get is that what happens for reasons we don't totally understand is your muscles tighten up. In addition to the fact that your mucosa is a mess, your skin is a mess, you need the estrogen, your muscles tighten up. Now that could be because there's pain. And so your body reacts by tightening, or it could be just as we get older, our muscles get tighter in other places. So you need to kind of re-stretch those muscles. Now, to do that, it's not complicated. You use these like sticky kind of things called dilators. They're like vaginal dilators. They're white. They tend to be white or colored, but this is a pen. But they started this size and they start getting wider and wider and wider. And you basically insert them, you move them around. You basically are teaching your vagina to do a split again, right? Like, right? Like, people don't understand the vagina is not a hole, right? It's not a space. It's a potential space. Think of a turtleneck sweater, right? You want your vagina to be able to open to let that penis in or a finger in or a dildo in or whatever, vibrator in, and close again when it's done, right? It has to be able to stretch, right? And for any number of reasons, our muscles get less stretchy as we get older. Nobody thinks to give women in their 40s or 50 dilators. They think of giving them to women who are 20 who are having pain because they're just starting out. But people think, oh, well, they've been married 20 years. They've been having intercourse for 20 years or whatever. Why would they need a dilator? So doctors don't think about that. So the estrogen alone doesn't help. Like, you need a combination. But if you use that combination, usually the problem takes, I don't know, 3 weeks. That client, the woman who came in, who was like, she came in, we gave her estrogen. I said, you do need to use estrogen. They're not crazy, the doctors, but I also want to give you these dilators to use. And I want you to use one every day for like 4 days and go up to the next size. Literally 2 weeks later, she came back. She said, I am 100% pain-free. And I don't know if I should laugh or I should cry, because on the one hand, it was so easy. On the other hand, I'm so mad that I wasted 2 years on something that was so freaking easy to fix. So for any woman who's listening out there right now, there are a couple other conditions that can be more complicated, like sclerosis, but your OBGYN will pick those up. But if you're having just pain with intercourse in a way you weren't having before, find out, get local estrogen that you can use in your vagina, and get yourself online. You can buy vaginal dilators. And I go all through all this in the book. It's so easy. You could do it yourself, or you can find a pelvic floor physical therapist or your doctor. There's ways to do that if you're like somebody who likes to work with somebody else. But there's no reason to have pain. There's no reason to have pain when you're 20. There's no reason to have pain when you're 30. There's no reason to have pain after you have babies. And there certainly is no reason to have pain in your 40s and your 50s and your 60s and your 80s.
Right. Oh, and I love that because, and here's the other thing. I think I see a lot of women that get divorced and they're in their 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, and they're not using it as much. And maybe they've even lost desire and they're just like, but if they want to find a new partner, I mean, like, come on, you're going to have to,
Yep.
I mean, that's part of having a partner, let's be honest. And one of the good parts of having that partner.
And you're
So,
totally right, by the way. If you, that thing about you lose it or use it or lose it, it is so true about your vagina. People just laugh about that, but it is so true. That vagina is going to tighten up, girl, if you don't use it. And if you don't have a partner, get yourself an internal vibrator or get yourself a dildo, or there's a lot of other ways, but you should have something in that vagina and you should make sure that you're comfortable and you still can get wet, and then you're good to go when the time comes.
Right.
And you don't feel nervous and you don't feel scared and you feel excited.
Exactly.
I love that you said that about the divorced women.
Yeah. Well, I'm on my third marriage, so I try to divorce women. So I'm like,
you really want to take care of that population.
yes, exactly. Okay, then let's go to arousal. So let's talk about arousal. What is arousal first? Because I think it can get confused with arousal and desire. Yeah.
Yes. I think like if there's a few aha moments I like to point out in my book. And one of them is that there is a difference between desire and arousal. So women will come in and they'll say, oh, I have no desire to have sex. And then when I'm talking to them more, what comes out is they do want to have sex. It's just that when they start having sex, it sucks, right? Like they don't get wet, they don't get turned on, they cannot turn off their brain with the like making lunches for their kids, or the carpools, they just cannot get past that. And nothing is happening in their body. That's arousal. Now, believe it or not, there are some women, not few, a lot, who say, I get started having sex, I get really turned on, my body gets wet, I'm like into it, my brain gets into it, I have an orgasm, and I still don't want to have sex. And I really love my partner. So it's not that. Every time we have sex, I'm like, he's confused, I'm confused, because I'm like, this was great. Why the hell don't I want to do it again? That is desire. And that seems to be a different neurological pathway. We don't quite understand why. But those are two things. And the moment you understand they're two things, it really is helpful because then you kind of know what to work on. So if the reason you don't want to have sex is because your sex sucks, then let's fix the sex, right?
Right.
If your sex is good, but you still don't have good desire, then we got to figure out what we can do to sort of get that little motor going again. Does that make sense? Or does that
no,
resonate?
I understand. So the desire part is like,
I want to have
can
sex.
think of, you do want to have sex? You want to have sex?
If you have desire,
then you want to have sex.
Correct.
Okay. And arousal is that you want to have sex, but you just can't get going. Right.
Okay. So let me say this again. Okay. If you're having a problem with desire, then you don't want to have sex. No matter how good the sex is, your just desire is gone. Right. And if your arousal is a problem, it's that you want to have sex, but nothing happens once you get started, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So desire, and people sometimes think one is physical, that's not true. They're both physical and they're both psychological, right? So arousal is getting turned on in your mind and your body. I'm having sex.
Is that tingly feeling? Is
that tingly feeling? Yeah. That tingly feeling and the ability to get your brain in the game. Those exactly the tingly, exactly those little butterfly-y, tingly, giggly things that are going on in your vulva and your vagina. Yes,
you're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling. Yeah,
exactly. And to do that, you really got to be there in your head and your body. That's arousal. Right.
Okay. Yeah. That's what left me for a while. I mean, it left me. I was like, where did you go? Okay.
Yes. And the testosterone, I'm sure, helped. And we can talk about other things. And then sometimes because of that, you don't want to have sex and your desire goes. But technically, like if I say to you, Gianna, I'll wave a magic wand and the sex will be great. Do you want to have sex? And you look at me like I'm crazy, like, of course I'd want to have sex if the sex is great. Then you're not having a desire problem. You're having an arousal problem. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Exactly.
Yeah. So now sometimes solving those things can be very overlapped, right? The same kinds of things can help because I'm telling you, the hormones can be super duper helpful. Also, looking at the arousal specifically, the other medications you're on can have a deep impact on that. So like SSRIs, the anti-anxiety medications can be make that more problematic, right? For sure. That could be a piece. And if people are still on birth control pills, sometimes people stay on birth control pills through perimenopause and menopause, and that can have a consistently higher and higher problem in terms of like arousal also. So you might want to look at those. But one of the things that I have found to be really critical to women is their erotic brain and how such a good job we do turning it off. Right.
Yeah, I think partly, to be honest with you, I think I did that a little bit when I became a grandmother. I thought it wasn't like conscious, but it was like, it's almost like when I became a mother, you're supposed to be like Mother Teresa, what I mean? And so I think that was part of what happened to me.
I love that. You know what? That could be a topic for another book, like grandmas and sex. 'Cause I think that that's so true. And we women do such a number of turning off our erotic brains unintentionally, really unintentionally. We turn it off because we're busy. We're doing a million other things. We think that we shouldn't have to work on it, right? Fantasies are something that should just drop by pixie dust, but that is not the reality. Like you have to actually work on it, a really good analogy to this is like if you speak another language, let's say you speak French. If you speak French all the time, you're going to be really good, and those words will just come to you like that, right?
Right.
If you stop speaking French for 10 years and then you want to speak it again, it's going to be really hard because that part of your brain has kind of shut down, right? The synapses aren't running, the blood isn't flowing, there's just less neurotransmitters. And you're going to have to work on getting it back again. But once you do, you find it gets easier and easier. That whole part of your brain starts to light up and function. And all of a sudden that French comes back. And you can learn Spanish easier at that point too, because that's the same part of the brain, right?
Right.
So what I say to women is you need to really start focusing on learning, going back to your fantasy life. That may be reading erotica, watching erotica, listening to erotica, fantasizing in your brain, but you need to start lighting up that erotic part of your brain. And I know it feels so weird in the beginning to be working on fantasies. Like we think, oh, fantasies should just happen, but they don't just happen. They don't just happen unless you've sort of used that part of your brain. And once you've used that part of your brain, it's more likely to pop back in. And wait, so before I say anything else, what do you think about that?
Oh, I like that. I think that's really true too. I mean, let's face it, who doesn't remember when we were all reading the book? Oh, what is it now?
50 Shades of Grey.
Yes. I mean, like you would be squirming the whole time when you're reading it if you read it. I can remember reading it on a airplane and I'm like, oh my heavens, and like, where's my husband?
That's great. That's what you want. I mean, that is what you want. And I love that book. I mean, I love that book because what it did to so many women, it freed them up to be thinking about sex in a really hot and sexy way. And women do this whole number of like, I shouldn't be thinking about this because like you said, I'm a grandmother, so I shouldn't be imagining sex with 3 people. That's not okay. Like what kind of grandmother am I? Or women will come in, they'll say like, I've been fantasizing about women, or I like to watch erotica about women or read erotica about women. Does that mean I'm a lesbian? I'm like, no, it does not mean you're a lesbian. It just means you like reading erotica about women. That's all it means. Women are so quick to like, I'm fantasizing about this actor or this baseball player or whatever. And like, oh my God, am I being disloyal to my husband? Right. Like that's,
right.
And I'm like, no, where did we come up with this idea that fantasy and reality are the same? They're not. What's going on in your head is just going on in your head, and you are doing it so that you can make your erotic brain wild and free, which is how it likes to be, and so that you can go back and have great sex with your partner. Your partner is going to be so much the beneficiary of your learning to fantasize and not judging that the fantasies are appropriate or wrong, or you're the wrong age for them, or they're they're too wild and crazy. Like, just let it go. It's just a fantasy. And it's so important for women to kind of learn to let that go. I think it's like critical.
I do. I think it's really hard because especially if you're brought up, I was brought up in a Christian home, and it was just like, like, I don't know, sex. We really didn't even talk about sex, but I just yesterday at church, our preacher talked about sex, and he was like, sex is meant to be enjoyed. And then there's a whole chapter. There's lots of it in the Bible talking about it and how amazing it can be. So it's not that we can enjoy it and we can, but for some reason I really do think in this Bible Belt we were really taught wrong. And so it's really a struggle. It has been a real big struggle for me. Like, I'm a bad girl if I think this, or if I'm a bad girl, like that kind of, that you have to really work on.
Because you're right. And your erotic brain does not like being held hostage. It just doesn't. And you have to just keep reminding yourself, just because I'm thinking about something does not mean that I want it to happen. It's so funny. We in English do not have good words for we have one word for fantasy, and that's fantasy. Like I laugh because like in New Zealand, they say there's like, I don't know, 17 different words for sheep, because they have lots of different sheep. And in Hebrew, which I actually speak, there's like 7 different words for God, right? That mean different elements of God, right? I feel like we need new words for fantasy, because when you say fantasy, like I'd like to have sex on the beach, that might be a fantasy that you might want to actually try, or in the ocean, right? That is really different than if you say, oh, Batsheva, I'm having a fantasy about like having sex on a rocket ship to Mars with 3 Martians. Like that, you're not expecting, that's a different experience, right? You know what I mean? Or being watched by people on a stage while I do a striptease, right? You don't actually want that to happen. That's just a fantasy that it's fun to revel in. And the more we can kind of figure out what turns us on, we each have our own erotic maps. Where they come from, I don't even really care. We just need to figure out that it's okay and not to worry about it. And so many of us feel like, transgressive sex that somehow feels wrong is big turn on. And you know what? You can go there in your head. It doesn't mean you're going to walk down that path of actually doing it. It just means it's fun to think about. And the more you can allow yourself to think about it, and the more sort of free you can let your erotic brain roam, I'm telling you, it's going to pay back in dividends. And we menopausal women have done such a number shutting down our erotic brains. It's time to like reclaim them and turn them around.
Yeah. It goes back to this thing of like, I feel like when I hit my 50, this is who I am. I don't care as much about what people think of me. Like when I was in my 40s, I'd probably never have a podcast where we talked about sex. I mean, and in my 50s, I'm passionate about this, because I'm passionate about letting women know that, hey, we need to be doing this, and you're not alone. If that libido, you feel like it's just gone down, 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 and you just don't even have that desire anymore, you're not alone, and there are things that you can do. And I think that's so important, because like we said at the very beginning, a good, healthy person has sex. I mean, we need it to release all these other things, oxytocin, and to live a healthy, vibrant, confident life.
Yes. Can I say one thing about vibrators also? I know we probably don't have that much more time, but I want to say, like, I feel like my PhD thesis was on vibrator use with women. And I know, right? And one of the most underused tools in women's sexual arsenal is a vibrator. And that's because women think of vibrators as something they should only use by themselves, and not something that they should use with their partner. And as we hit menopause and perimenopause and menopause, sometimes it gets harder to have orgasms. And that vibrator can take a job which feels like it could take forever, or it's not happening. And it makes it so easy and so fun. And one of the things I'm always preaching to women is that vibrator is a tool just like lubricant. If it makes it easier for you to have an orgasm, take it into the bedroom with your partner. And, 9 out of 10 partners, I would say 9 3/4 out of 10 partners love that vibrator. It makes their job easier. Their hand and their mouth and their penis get really tired.
Exactly.
So that vibrator can be life-changing. I had an 80-year-old patient who, I loved her so much. She was like a bird watcher, and she was full of life, and she was having a hard time having orgasms. And so I gave her first vibrator. It worked great. And she used it with her husband. And one day she comes in and she says to me, we were on this trip. We came back from this trip to Greece, and my husband was like totally down the rabbit hole of making an album, and he was ignoring me. And it really got me very upset. So I took the vibrator and I left it on his pillow. Isn't that a great story?
Love that.
So he got the hint when he came in. And there's no reason, if it's a little if you're having orgasms is different in your 60s than it was in your 40s or your 80s, that's fine. Just realize that there are so many tools to get the sex right back on track and to have fabulous sex all your whole life. I just feel like the more you know about the options, the more empowered you feel.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know in the book, do you have a chapter on the vibrator and
Yes.
which ones you recommend and
Yes,
all that? Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a
Yeah.
chapter on fantasies. I have a chapter on vibrators. I have a chapter on all those hormones we talked about. I have chapters about like just some very practical suggestions about things to do that may be helpful. I have a chapter on like the biggest problems that come up and how to avoid them. Like, here's my feeling, Deanna. If we can make women feel empowered to get the help that they need, you can have a great sex life your whole life. And there's no
Mhm.
reason not to, right? There's no, for
Right.
all the reasons you said, like sex is
Mhm.
just such an important part of who we are. And for all the women who are listening, who are feeling like hopeless, because I know it could get like that. You feel like it's never going to get better, Bacheva. Like that's just not the case. Like it is so, I think that's probably part of why I love working in the sexual health field. Like I'm a therapist, but I love working in sexual health because I feel like you can make really good strides really quickly with sexual health in a way that you can't with, anger or, depression.
Right.
You can change those things, but this is something that's so concrete. And, I'll say to people, I didn't go into this field because I'm so fascinated by body part A and how it fits into body part B. Do you know what I mean? Like that's good and that's interesting. And I will talk about that a lot, but I'm much more interested in how sex affects us as people and affect our relationship because it has,
Mhm.
just for all the reasons you said, it has such a deep, deep impact on how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our relationship. And you can be empowered to make it better.
Oh, I love this. I love it. Okay. So Dr.
Batsheva.
Batsheva, I'm gonna get this, Dr. Batsheva. So tell everybody where they can find you and how to get your book and all of that. We'll have all this in the show notes too, you guys. So if you don't have to write it down, you can click on the show notes, but go ahead and tell us every.
Yeah, so I'm very active on Instagram and TikTok. I feel like they're great platforms for education. So I'm Dr. Batsheva, Dr. Batsheva, Batsagva on Instagram. I'm the Dr. Batsheva on TikTok because they threw me off the first time.
Oh,
Can you
wow.
believe it? I'm so conservative. I cannot believe they threw me off. Anyway, anyhow, but I'm there as the Dr. Batsheva. And my website is drbatsheva.com. And my book is available at any major booksellers like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. If you go to my website, there's a click. So you can, and I love, especially on social media, I love hearing from people, getting feedback from people. So, I hope you can tell I do this because I feel so passionate about it. And I want people to feel like they can own their sex life. And I'm always sort of here and available because I want to talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate what you are doing for all of us women out there because I think that, yeah, we need to know that there are different things that we can do, that we don't have to accept pain, not having the arousal, not having the desire, and we certainly we want that orgasm. At least I do. I know. I think most women do want that orgasm too, right?
Yeah, well,
So
thank you for everything you're doing, bringing this to people, because you're right. It's a conversation that's hard for people to have. And we live in a world that just seems saturated with sex, but then nobody's actually having real conversations about it. Right. So good
right.
for you. And thank you for doing this so much.
Well, thank you again for coming on to Well and Worthy Life. And I appreciate it. And I can't wait to get the book and really dive into it myself because I'm sure there's lots of improvement I can still make. And I want to have a long, long sexual life with my partner. So thank you again. I appreciate it.